Hello and welcome to another episode of the Folklore Podcast. I'm Mark Norman, folklore researcher and author. And this week I'll be exploring the performance of folk music in one of its barest forms with my very special guests, Lunatraktors. Lunatraktors are duo Carli Jefferson and Clair Couteur. Forming in 2017, the project takes folk and it strips it down to its very basics, rhythm and voice. Their performance takes inspiration from a variety of genres and it reimagines Anglo-Celtic folk music in a very modern way, but with a backing of in-depth research and investigation into the history of the music itself and also its performance. And more than just the music, Lunatraktors have a focus on dance, on costume and artistic installation in their live work, and they've created performances for festivals, for galleries and museums, including the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum in London, and the Turner Prize opening weekend. So who are they? Carli is a dancer, a percussionist and a clown whose professional career started with the percussion group Stomp on their international tour from 2001 to 2004. Originally training as a tap dancer, she's spent more than 20 years honing a specialism in body percussion, performance and choreography. Dr. Clair Couteur is a visually impaired, non-binary trans vocalist and artist and scholar, exploring the heritage of folk and voice through both performance and research. Having difficulty reading transcribed music, Clair usually works by ear and composes and performs on keyboard instruments or on whistles. They have a vocal range of over 3 octaves and they specialise in overtone singing, which uses particular mouth and tongue positions to change the vocal resonance. Earlier this year, Lunatraktors released Wassail, which they describe as a wild, sonic celebration of folklore, fertility and deep-rooted ritual. It brings a fresh, psychedelic twist on the ritual of blessing apple trees for the year ahead, and it combines modern synths with bells, pipes and goatskin drums. Here's a chance to listen to the track now, and after that you'll be able to hear and see, if you're on YouTube, my interview with Lunatraktors.
O apple tree, we wassail thee, hoping thou wilt bear. For who doth know where we may be, come another year. O apple tree, O apple tree, we wassail thee. Tree, we wassail thee, hoping thou wilt bear. For who doth know where we may be, come another year. Grow well and bear well. Grow well and bear well. Merrily let us be. Let everyone lift up their cups in a health to the apple tree. Grow well and bear well. Grow well and bear well. Let everyone lift up their cups in a health to the apple tree. Bring souls, bring souls. tree, we wassail thee, hoping thou wilt bear. For who doth know where we may be, come another year. We ask you for to grow well and bear well. We ask you for to grow well and bear well, and merrily let us be. Let everyone lift up their cups, let everyone lift up their hearts, let everyone lift up their cups, in a health to the apple tree, brave souls. In a health to the apple tree, brave souls. In a health to the apple tree. Grow well and bear well.
Lunatraktors, welcome to the Folklore Podcast. We have been together before in other arenas, but never actually on this show. So you are both very welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, my pleasure. Just so that people who are listening to the audio version of this know whose voice to associate with whom, would you like to both introduce yourselves and say a little bit about each other or yourselves?
Okay, I guess I'll speak from myself, as myself, for myself. My name's Carli Jefferson. I am a choreographer, percussionist, clown. I'm the one that hits the things and stamps around and makes the harmonies and some of the arrangements.
My name's Claire Couteur. I am mostly a singer and researcher, so I do a lot of the looking stuff up and finding all of the old variations on the words and stuff. I also play a little bit of keys, accordion, whistle, that kind of thing.
Excellent. I celebrate you as an accordion player myself. Obviously, we just need to get that solidarity in at the beginning, I think.
Nice.
I'd love to pass on to anyone out there something that we figured out about I play a very big bass accordion, which is very difficult on the shoulders, and especially if you're singing, it can weigh on your chests. And we figured out that you can buy a very inexpensive weightlifting object called a dip belt, which is a kind of wide hip belt, and then you can attach that to the bottom fixture for the shoulder straps, which means that you can hold the accordion's weight on your hips, or at least partially on your hips. Totally recommend that. I haven't seen anyone making accordion waist belts, but you can get these dip belts very reasonably priced. So that's
Perfect.
my top tip for heavy accordions.
That is a top tip and possibly a market niche to look into.
Indeed. Well,
Yeah.
because we speak to accordion players and they always mention, especially if they're singing as well, that it's very difficult to get the air and to fill yourself up to be able to sing whilst playing, no? Because there's that quite a huge weight that you're carrying. So it did feel like quite a discovery, didn't it?
Yeah, I like it. I like it. I shall try it myself. Okay, so Lunatraktors, as a duo, tell us a little bit about how you came into being and what the kind of ethos behind your work is.
We started off. We met when we were both living in Prague, and I was recording at that time solo original stuff with piano, very much in a kind of Regina Spektor mode, and met Carli, and Carli ended up doing a lot of percussion on that record. That ended up being our first kind of record. It's not a Lunatraktors record, but it is available on Lunatraktors Bandcamp if you want it. So we met like that, and then I'd been researching a bunch of folk songs kind of accidentally as part of my PhD artwork. because I got interested in folk songs as a sort of anti-museum. I'm really interested in museums. But the thing that I don't really like about museums, particularly if you're trying to make them, is that you need a lot of fancy real estate, big cases and space. It's very much tends to be about fancy things, or if not fancy things, then big cases for things that are fancy in other ways. Maybe they're
Mm.
fancy because they're old or rare, or they make a particular point you're trying to make. So I guess the thing for me about folk music was that it was all about community and performance and the stories of everyday people as opposed to big fancy stuff in glass boxes. So I got really interested in that. I got really interested in all of the broadside ballads I was finding in museum collections, many of which aren't sung anymore. We don't know what tunes go with a lot of them, the most of them. They range from the most disgusting kind of propaganda, hate speech, you could say. There's lots and lots of um, sort of xenophobia, misogyny, anti-Semitism, all that stuff in those old songs. And then there's a whole bunch of like racy romances, weird comedy, the whole range of stuff. And I got really interested in a bunch of songs that were about the colonial triangle of England, Ireland, and Australia, which is my family history. So I got really interested in what it meant to sing those songs now, how it spoke to current government policy, how it spoke to current political situations, and how it reminds us where we came from, and where we still are in a lot of the time.
And something that felt that it pulled us together, certainly, and the way that we started to work together was on the streets in Prague, with nothing. No, we were just walking around using our voices, using our bodies. I was mostly at that time making my living tap dancing, working with dancers, choreographing, working with various types of dancers, and realizing that rhythm was something that kind of pulled us all together, even though there were lots of different genres of dance, that rhythm was a real core. And if people could really tune into that, then it made them very, very special, kind of next level performers. And so something that connected us was this question of, also because we were both thinking quite apocalyptically during our teens and onward, was what can we do when it's all gone? What do we still have left? And it seemed like in this kind of wave of tech and lots of things happening, with the more stuff you can have and the more sounds you can make with electronica as well, which we love also. But there was also a pull to, what can we do if the lights go out and if everything's pulled? What can we still sing as a song, and what conveys the kind of feelings that we wanted to get across? Something about protest as well, something about feeling like we wanted to raise up the voices of the underdogs, the people's voices that weren't necessarily being heard. So yeah, that's kind of where we started the project.
And you gave a really, really fascinating TED talk, which kind of strips back this as well, the idea of using voice and those kinds of things. How did that come? I'll put a link to it on the website for people to go and have a look at, because it really is wonderful. How did that come about?
We'd been talking and doing lecture performances at a number of different venues. At that time, I was still working at the Royal College of Art and at Open School East, and so we were kind of in this mode where we'd been giving lecture performances about the somatic stuff that we're interested in, about this huge amount you can do with the body and voice, and how, at least for us, that's the root of music and storytelling in general is this bodily thing, and the huge amount of intensity and excitement that you can produce just with that, just with what we have, um, rather than needing any fancy tech or needing any fancy equipment, that you can actually give people really radical, exciting experiences just through those practices, those techniques of the body. And so we pitched it to TEDx in Folkestone to see if they wanted to host us talking about it. And yeah, went really well. It was really nice.
Yeah, it was
It's
brilliant.
it's something that also really, I think, really surprises people still when they see you just stand there and make, a lot of interesting sounds with with your mouth and with your body. It also then, because there's kind of a third voice that happens between the two voices, there's other harmonics start to jump out. And also it reminds people how much potential they have for noise and sound making, which we've often shut down. We've often kind of quietened ourselves down as we've got older. We've been told, oh no, don't, maybe you haven't got the best of voices, or, and we kind of stop ourselves from singing just for the pleasure of it. We stop ourselves making noise in public, in social spaces, and that kind of encouraging people to make sounds even if they're not very pretty sounds,
Especially if they're not very
especially
pretty.
if they're not pretty,
It
because
really, yeah.
we're all feeling that need, to let out and to process somehow all the very complicated feelings that we're having, bodily feelings right now in relation to what's happening in the world as well. So
I feel like as well, there's this thing about the voice and the body is that they're endlessly, you can always make a sound that you don't expect. You can always find something new. You can always do something that, I mean, obviously, it's really helps to listen to a whole lot of different music and performance from around the world to give you inspiration. But, really, if you're just messing around on your own, making weird sounds, and then you find the musical place for those sounds, if you find this a place in a performance where, that's the sound that really fits in this place. This is where that sound wants to go. That sense of the mosaic of sounds, and finding that every possible sound has a place in music. I mean, I think we have a both kind of a self-taught interest in experimental music,
mm,
experimental sound, the idea that deep listening can produce insight and new experience, and that you don't necessarily know when you first hear something its value, that you could, and that actually it's possible to listen to as the Irish traditional music. There's a lot of stuff in Irish traditional music about listening to rivers as musical. And actually, if you really find the right kind of bubbling water, natural spring sounds, and you've listened to a lot of Irish folk music recently, you can definitely hear those triplets. You can hear that incredible lilting, running over itself kind of rhythmic beauty. And I feel like, so I think that for both of us, we're really into this musique concrète. We're really into all kinds of fascinating, interesting sounds that you can get, and that every sound has its place. Um,
Yeah,
and once you're listening, then you can't turn it off. No, then
yeah,
everything's singing. So, and that's beautiful. Sometimes a bit overwhelming, but
yeah, absolutely. And it's like you say, for people who say, "Oh, but I can't do it because I can't sing, I can't hold a note, I can't hold a tune." I mean, you're talking as well, particularly Carly, I guess, percussively,
Mm,
and you don't even need to be able to hold a note or a tune in order to create music using what you have.
yeah. And I think we get very that it's both things, no, because the more we tell ourselves that we can't, very much, even more we lose that ability and everything closes up. And I know for myself that that got very, very closed down. And with that lack of sort of self-confidence, then the voice got smaller and more and more. I struggled more and more with that feeling that I could even use it and trust that I could use it and it have power. And I think the more that you start to just exercise it as a muscle, as an instrument in general, your body, no, we know as we get older as well, things start to get harder and crunchier, and it's more of a challenge. So we do have to try and keep that flexibility about it, but it can grow. I mean, my voice is only, I still really feel like I'm very much at the beginning of discovering what can be done with it, and with the body the same. But we have to keep that curiosity, I think, about it, because otherwise we can just shut things down and say, oh, no, I'm not good at that. I can't do that. And you're limiting what could actually be really, really beautiful and exciting pathways for you.
And realistically, not everybody in the world can be an operatic mezzo soprano, but also equally realistically, there's a lot of other things that you can be. You don't. I'm not particularly into operatic mezzo sopranos in terms of my personal listening time, anyway. And there are all these really extreme and very kind of stylized forms of singing, and that they're really exacting, and there's only one way of doing them, and all this kind of stuff. And that's really not. I just don't find them that interesting. I sometimes they're very technically impressive, but I'm much more interested in archival recordings, field recordings of people singing folk songs, and they're not particularly strong singers. Maybe they're a bit older as well. Often people stuff gets collected from older people, and they often have you can hear in the voice a kind of uncertainty, and you can hear all of that. But if you're telling the story and you're singing for your own pleasure, then other people will find pleasure and interest in it too.
We certainly have very, very valuable archives, particularly in Ireland, of course, for collections of that type as well. But field collection, in many ways, I guess, isn't what it used to be these days. Do we consider that kind of collection of folk song or other song being performed by the person on the street, if you like, in that way, rather than by professional performers? Is that at risk now of being lost in terms of its collection compared to how it was collected in the past? What do you think?
I mean, it's a complicated question, because I don't, what people were looking for when they were collecting depends very much on the collector. I think there's definitely a whole bunch of people who are collecting songs, going around, and particularly there are populations of people who have an awareness and knowledge of songs that are not mainstream. UK and Irish travelers are one of those groups. But there's also a very complicated ethics of collecting. And I think collectors have often given the impression to communities that they are going to give something back to them. So they've told them, oh, and we'll get you a recording contract, or I'll put this on an album, or
somehow.
There's a sense of promise, and there's a sense of unbalance, in terms of power discrepancy, and privilege and all that kind of thing. I feel like the difficulty with song collection before is that that people are looking for old and rare things. And they're looking for old and rare things primarily in places where you find old and rare things, i.e., places where those things haven't been replaced by new and commercial things. And the idea of uncontacted communities, or people who remember songs that nobody else has heard, I think that gets much rarer, as media becomes just more and more dominant and universalized. I feel like there is certainly a lot of people who are making songs in the folk tradition now still, and it's beautiful to collect those songs, whether they are valued by collectors as original historical things, or whether they have value because somebody's made them up, is a whole other thing.
And I think it's always it feels very important for us always to acknowledge where those things have come from, know where we have found those things, and then if we can trace back where those people found those things. And sometimes I think that train of acknowledgement and thus respect and giving credit to people gets a little bit lost. That it gets lost even firsthand. Often there's something that you find you've done, somebody hasn't acknowledged you, and you go, oh, that's interesting. And it's not even that you're really looking for the credit, but just that mechanism when somebody thinks, it's important for me to acknowledge that these other people in this line were how I came about this. And for a lot of people now, that there's that tendency to kind of take it and then sort of say it's mine now,
Yeah.
and that I think is a difficulty and something we have to be really careful of, because that's kind of one of those mechanisms of that manipulation of power and that kind of greed. No, the taking something and passing it off as your own, which I think is very harmful to communities, actually, to
Yeah, I
their
mean, yes, manipulation is an interesting word there as well, because of course, in terms of collection as well, as that kind of ownership, there was the manipulation in collection, particularly historically, in terms of, well, we see it like cross-border, like Welsh folklore being collected predominantly by English collectors who are then putting their own spin on it. The majority of historic Edwardian Victorian folklore collecting being done by relatively affluent white middle to upper class males. And you get that interpretation manipulation then of material, which I think we're a lot better. I hope we're a lot better at avoiding these days than was the case back then. But there's still plenty of that to be found, isn't there?
I think it's difficult too because there are other ways that you manipulate your collecting material, and there's lots of examples where the the thing that the collector is looking for, um it was very interesting. So for example, we were just at the as we were saying at this conference in Killarney that your roots are showing. We were talking to some banjo player. I was listening to some banjo players talk, and the idea that rural banjo players have tunes, and have been playing tunes in particular styles that got lost everywhere else. Um, and then there was this kind of banjo conference, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, and we're the only people playing these tunes." And then literally there were people there who were like, apart from us, obviously, we've been playing the tunes the entire time. You just collected them from us. Um, and I think this is it's a difficult thing. I feel like it's a difficult thing as well with collection. If the person who's collecting it doesn't have a good sense of rhythm, or if they just don't, and also maybe the person they're collecting it from, um, isn't playing the tune in the best way or whatever, it's possible to
to lose
it's possible to lose the
somehow.
it's possible to lose the touch of the tune. And so, for example,
Yeah.
there's a whole bunch of stuff in traditional, a whole bunch of traditional English stuff is in a five. But if you're a collector and you don't understand that it's in a five, you just think that the person who's singing it is singing it wrong. There's also a whole bunch of stuff about people not wanting to sing dirty or nonsensical stuff to fancy collectors, or um, it. I think you can skew your collecting very easily, and I think also it's really possible to to assume that you know what you're listening to, and then you don't even realize that you've twisted it.
Well, of course, and there were accusations, weren't there, of bowdlerization by like antiquarian clergy collectors in the Victorian period, who would perhaps rewrite some of the bawdier songs to make them a bit
Yeah.
more palatable. But even then, that's sometimes unfairly cited these days, because Sabin Baring Gould, for example, who collected throughout the Southwest, presented tamer versions of those songs, but not because he didn't want to frighten the horses or anything like that, but just because he wanted them to be sung in schools and in places like that. So they needed to have a different version so that they would go into the kind of songbooks that were used for many, many years in schools. But he recorded all the original lyrics in his manuscripts, and we have all those
Yeah,
separately.
that
So sometimes it's an unfair leveling, I think, too.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I do think it's also it's yes, of course, there's been lots of developments in terms of finding ways to be a participant observer, there people lots of people thinking and doing very careful craft about okay, and but I think it's really easy to dismiss antiquarians and Victorian collectors as in some sense naive or useless, and that we're so much better now, and we're certainly not. Like if you go out as an undergrad, if you go out as an urban undergrad somewhere, it- you're equally likely to make terrible errors of judgment for all of the our much vaunted academic superiority now to the past. I think that people in the past had an enormous amount of sophistication and they were making choices for a lot of good reasons as well.
It's about acknowledgement, isn't it? And just making those, recognizing and crediting, always making that note. And things do move, things do shift, and we rewrite certain things because we pick out parts that we think, that seems to almost be have been slightly erased. That voice isn't quite saying what we think maybe was intended there, or what we would like to bring out more in the text, in the narrative. So, but there always needs to be that looking back and saying, okay, but this is where it came from, and giving that credit as well. So there's a balance always, I think.
Folklore generally is a fluid topic, isn't it? And things do change and develop for many, many reasons. Whether they're being passed from community to community and being adapted based on cultural norms for that group, or because times change and people change and the subject matter changes too. You're right. So let's focus on your own material for a little bit then. We've kind of given a bit of background to that. You describe a lot of your material using the phrase broken folk. Would you like to elaborate on what that concept embodies for you?
Yeah, I think it was difficult for us at the beginning when you're people that don't necessarily like the pigeonholes or the categorizations anyway, and you don't feel like you really fit within any of those genre boxes. it Broken folk for us emerged out of some conversations and that feeling of, okay, well, alternative folk, yes, it's trad folk, it is traditional folk, but that didn't make sense either, just to have that as the description. So maybe psychedelic folk, that felt a bit long, and so broken folk just came up. We invented the hashtag, and we were like, okay, and it feels like it hit something with people. It resonated with people somehow, feeling like we're within times that the systems feel so broken, even though the systems are really doing what they have been designed to do. But they do, but everything, we feel like we're living in quite dystopian and broken times now. So it just felt quite appropriate for us. And there's more behind Broken, which was about also that influence of kind of breakbeat, these other sort of influences that we grew up with, born in the late 70s, early 80s. So there was a feeling of that there was a certain kind of dance music culture that was emerging when we were
Which is of
young.
course folk music. Rave
Yeah.
is folk music too. And I think we're really aware. We try to be really aware of where and when we are, and where we've come from, and what our musical influences are. I've got my Prodigy hat on right now from the 2000s. But we're quite. I guess we're quite. We're also quite specific about mythologies of folk. Obviously, we're just as nostalgic and susceptible as anyone to the dream of the perfectly handed down ancient thing that we would love to somehow connect through the lens of this song to the deep pre-Christian past where we're all walking around with like antlers on our heads and everything's great. But
Is it?
Um, no, but but I think the thing for us about Broken Folk was intentionally pushing against the idea of a pure, uncorrupted folk tradition, and I think it's still very much a stereotype built within a within the public consciousness about the idea that folk music is rural primarily, even though people have been living in cities for tens of thousands of years. Um, Folk music is from one kind of ethnicity, that is a pure kind of lineage, and that sense of purity for us about is the blood and soil ethno-nationalist stuff that leads to fascist opinions, and we're really not into that. We're from families who've traveled around, and we certainly have traveled around ourselves, and we're not into that idea of purity at all. And I think that thing,
Well, the hybridity is actually really interesting.
yeah, I
That's
mean,
where great things happen
that
as well.
hybridity and change and discontinuity and stuff deserves to be celebrated rather than seen as some kind of problem with folk music. Like, oh, this is this tradition has been ruined by its changes, or its movements, or corrupted by things. And I think that sense of approaching our music as inherently already broken, already corrupted, already fragmented, and that being a beautiful thing, that being an exciting and interesting thing. That's also where we're coming from with the idea of broken folk.
People can be very precious and very resistant to change in any topic, I guess. But it's when you talk about folk music, then you've got to define the word folk in its absolute sense. It's just music of the people, isn't it? It doesn't matter whether it's a rave or whether it's a fiddle tune. It's still music of the people, and it still embodies the same thing.
I mean,
Yeah.
people were using fiddles to have raves, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If they'd had like a drum machine, in the 1500s in the Scottish Highlands, they would have slapped that thing on and turned it up. That's that's what people like. That's
Yeah.
a dance party. But I guess, yeah, for us, it's we really do care about trying to connect to primal feelings, and we really do like early music, and we really like, you know, um, really low tech bagpipes, that you can find all over the place. We were just in a couple of years ago, we were in the very east of Turkey near the Georgian border in the mountains, where they still have the fur on their bagpipes.
Yeah, it's very much
On
still looks like a goat.
It's just a goat with,
Yeah.
bits just stuck on it. And it's intense music. They've got a very limited tune thing, but they have two chanters, and it has that intense, mind-altering vibe. Goes on very well with their hard alcohol.
But that was also a very beautiful moment that we shared. It was actually part of a theatre festival that we'd gone there to perform at. And we were in the street. I had a drum. I didn't realize that I would suddenly be like turned around, was the Tulum player, the goat player, and the accordionist. They turned to me, went, "Great, you've got the drum. Okay."
Because they didn't have a drummer in
nobody
the
was
village.
the drum.
Yeah.
Traditionally,
At
that
most.
music is always played with the drum,
So
but
they
nobody had a
looked at me
drum.
like, okay. So, and then they made the motion like this kind of beat, which was generally just, whack it.
Go
So
for it.
I started whacking it. We traveled the whole journey with them. And then it was really sad to actually say goodbye. We ended up you learning how to play the Tulum a little
little
bit in
bit.
a little schoolroom. And,
I'd like to do
it was
that
a
more.
really beautiful feeling of them welcoming us and opening into like, okay, well, you're clearly not from here, but you've got a drum, let's do this. And so that feeling of that being able to share moments as well, when musicians come together from different cultures and you can fuse something, you can all bring up that energy together. That felt really beautiful.
Well, music is a shared language, right? You don't need to be able to understand each other in other ways to be able to share that language.
Indeed.
Yeah, I mean, it's many languages. That's the thing, and I think if people are playing a kind of music that you don't know, it's absolutely not possible to sit in on every kind of music with every kind of instrument. That there are particular things where no, we're all playing this,
Yeah.
we're all playing this
The
together.
code of
If you
Or
were
the
to try and
step-in.
step in on this and do something else, it wouldn't sound great. So
No.
I think there's lots of
It
different
depends on what that instrument is
yeah,
and
I
what the
think
context
some
is.
music is more open than others, in the same way that some performances are more open than others, some languages are more open than others,
Yeah,
for somebody to step in without any knowledge, and
yeah.
sometimes you wanna just stop and listen, and I think that's
But then by the end, I mean, we had the entire street had formed a circle around
they
us,
love a circle
and we're
dance
doing the circle dances now. So it was,
and
the
circle
sort of
dances
power
and
that could generate
drums.
collectively was
Drums, bagpipes, and
the
circle
drama
dances are
helped.
definitely things that lots of people were doing in the
Mm,
Neolithic all over the place.
Mm.
yeah.
And yeah, we definitely, there is that sense, there is that feeling with studying folklore and mythology that there are pathways back to something very ancient. You do get a glimpse, you get a taste of something that happened, of a feeling from a long, long time ago, a feeling with really deep roots. And I feel like
Mm.
that is obviously always what we're chasing. We love that as much as anyone else. So we're absolutely not saying that that's not possible or valuable, but we are definitely talking about how you got to be skeptical, you got to retain that sense of perspective as well, and also that something can be really new. Let's God Rest You Merry Gentlemen, for example. Really lovely medieval vibe, but from the 1800s.
Mm.
Doesn't mean that it can't give you that mood. Doesn't mean that it can't evoke that sense of ancient
Mm.
feeling, but that doesn't mean it's ancient.
No, no, absolutely. Something that perhaps is a lot older is the folklore behind one of your more recent tracks, which we heard at the top of the show, and which I'd like to talk a little bit about, which is Wassail, a very old tradition, um, a tradition that we still see a lot these days in many different ways. Some very long-standing wassails with good longevity behind them, some recreated, some revivalist wassails, and some newer wassails. So urban wassailing on the high street, wassailing community shops, charity shops, off licenses where there are no trees. Every type of version that you can think of.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that track and the research that you did to bring that into being.
I mean, wassailing obviously is about drinking.
Yes.
It's not wassailing is older than its use as a ritual with orchards and stuff. It's a kind of possibly a Norse thing. There's lots of people. I think the Venerable Bede is complaining about wassailing, being like, "This is not a British thing. What are you guys doing?" So there's definitely this kind of complex history with it. But what we're talking about in this context, obviously, is about pouring libations or giving gifts, a thank you gift to trees to wake them up, specifically orchard trees. Now, some of the oldest wassailing descriptions of wassailing type stuff, it's not just apple trees, it's all different kinds of orchard trees. And obviously the idea of pouring libations to the earth for fruitfulness and all that kind of thing is older than any wassailing tradition. We There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of that kind of behavior in Roman culture and all of that kind of thing. So the idea of wassailing as this kind of thing that has to be done in a particular way or has a particular significance or one particular location where it's happening, I think it's useful to describe it. I think in the broadest way, it's
Mm.
useful to describe. There's some descriptions of wassailing as in a recognizable way, with mulled cider and apple orchards and stuff, at least back to the 1500s. But it's probably way, I mean, that kind of behavior is way older. And I feel like that kind of behavior just makes sense intuitively to a lot of people. They like the idea of going in, giving thanks and giving the love to and the hope to their crops and and they're trees that they want to keep going, they want to keep surviving.
Yeah, and somehow this even that motto or that meaning of just grow well and bear well, then it becomes about an extension of, no, because you're talking to the trees, you're talking to the nature, you're wanting to connect and ground yourself in with that. But there's also that hope that you're also wishing that to your neighbor, to your friends, to the businesses that have managed to survive the next year of capitalism, and they're clinging on. We have friends that are doing one in Faversham in mid-February, actually. So they're, and they're going down the high street. And so it feels like there's more and more need. Actually, we've seen a real surge of people of various Morris sides being really, really involved with it, that people are doing the ritual in the way that they can in relation to their environment. And sometimes you don't have, the lovely, perfect apple tree down at the end of your road,
Exactly. It's adaptable, isn't it? I found a really interesting example when I was researching wassailing in the southwest of the UK, where I live, for one of my books, and a really similar parallel sequence of speech and whatever from one of them, which was from Japan. A very similar ceremony. The only difference being that in Japan, they threatened the tree at the end of it, which is really unusual. And there's this bit at the end where they do all of the other stuff, and then they're like, if you don't give good fruit this year, we're just going to cut you down.
Cutting you down.
And that is completely the antithesis of every other version of just like celebrating and giving thanks. And this is just like, no, if you don't get it right, you're gone. That's it.
Wow.
The interesting thing as well about some wassailing stuff like shooting guns through the branches or hitting the tree with burning sticks and that kind of stuff. So I mean, there definitely is a kind of coded violence in some UK wassailing.
That's just driving the spirits away, though, right? Isn't it? It's not threatening the tree.
Indeed.
I don't know how the tree feels about it, but we'll
see.
You'll find out in the autumn when you need to get the apples off the bus.
Oh, the apples taste really rubbish. It'll get you back somehow.
So what did your research process look like for this particular subject?
Well, actually, the research process was quite a physical and an interactive situation not in terms necessarily of the text, but we were asked, actually, weirdly, when we were in Japan in 2023, we were performing at a Korean music showcase. But on the way, we decided to, okay, well, we're going to this part of the world. Let's go to Japan and then let's go on to Korea. And in Japan, we got a call from a friend who was curating a wassail event. She asked us, she brought up the subject. Okay, I think you'd be the perfect people to make a ceremony, to make a wassail. Okay, cool. So we started to look a little bit more into it. And we actually, in last January, got together in a kind of art gallery, old hall, very, very, very beautiful building, and they have gardens where they have various fruit trees, and we walked through the forest with a procession of about 200 people, and did a kind of physical kind of ceremony. We sang some songs. There were other artists who we kind of facilitated into finding a few other songs. We shared some songs also from Poland, from Persia, so other cultures that were also have these similar custom, basically. Or so that was the first kind of phase of that. And then at the end of this year, we were singing it with about 200 people again in a centenary centre in the Isle of Man, but a cappella. We gave them the words. They all had that set on their seat, reading the words. They sang beautifully, actually, and we kind of got back from that and went, okay, let's just make the track, because if we stop now, we're probably going to collapse into a January hole of not getting anything done. So let's carry on and do this thing. So we made the song, but with a kind of more of an approach to like making a remix, basically singing a remix rather than making a song and remixing it.
Right.
And we only concentrated on one piece of the song. We could have sung many different verses, but it just felt that we wanted to kind of just get across a very simple message, actually.
Most of our research at the moment is done online. Um, we look on Broadside Ballad archives. We look on various different folklore sites, encyclopedias, all that kind of stuff. Read a few academic articles, and we're really looking for a kind of syncretic overall trying to find the kind of middle of that. So we make a kind of constellation of different influences and inputs, and we try and find those sort of commonalities or center points to get our own sense of what a tradition could be or might have been. We're definitely not about the local, really. We're really interested in kind of mixing things together. And I think that's one of the things that also that Victorian folklorists and anthropologists were slated for. And I think actually seeing some of their work as creative or as literature rather than as I think it becomes much more valuable again when you see it as an imaginative act rather than I think it's difficult when they're portraying it as as objective science. But yeah, so for us, because we're working on the other side of things, we're less worried about that. We're really interested in really looking very carefully at historical and archival materials and really trying to get past expected preconceptions of stuff and really follow it back a little bit further in multiple directions and get that sense of trying to find those unique and strange bits. And then we just put all of that into the pot and stir it round and start performing things. We learn some words by heart. We try and look. We listen to a whole lot of tunes until a tune grabs us, and then we just let it progress. So we perform it in front of people. That's something that we like to call performance research. We feel like you don't really know a song until you've sung it for people. You may have sung it yourself on your own, and maybe that also counts as a performance because it's you're listening to your own performance. But we really believe that things change in front of people and gesture and tonality and audio come out when you're performing it in front of people that you wouldn't be able to predict. That things come alive and they take on their own kind of momentum, their own kind of they have their own kind of needs, that maybe, for example, you need to pause or slow down particular parts of the song because the audience always needs to laugh and then they can never hear the next line. So there's this kind of there's this process that all of our songs undergo. We tend not to like just learning something and then recording it. Although we do it sometimes. We recently did it for Carl Sinfield with this beautiful song Yarrow. I don't know if you know the Dowie Dens of Yarrow. And that was something that we didn't get to perform. Perform to anyone. We just performed it for each other.
And when we perform that live, that's going to be a trip.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's a kind of reverse engineering, no? Because then you've recorded the piece, but maybe it's quite a complicated landscape that you've managed to summon with different instrumentation. And then if we realize we're going to perform that live, that's
how do we
the
do
next
that?
challenge. How to do that.
How do we take
and
this?
That's exciting.
How do we take this to the stage?
Yeah.
I feel like with Wassail, we really want to, and with quite a lot of our recordings recently, we really want to make a kind of imaginary landscape in the sense that we want to feel like we're entering somewhere. We want to feel like we can hear the weather and hear people and hear, so I think a lot of that for us is about creating almost a kind of hypnagogic thing, a kind of a scene, where if you close your eyes and listen to the track, you maybe feel like you've gone somewhere.
Yeah. A sense of place and a sense of a quiet of voices, a choir of people that perhaps aren't singers, or that are, that they know the song in a slightly different way. So we will then sing different layers with different characters or different people in mind, or our different characters of ourselves come out, which
we didn't want it
helps
to sound like a church choir,
Yeah.
We didn't want it to, or like a glee club. We wanted it to sound like a bunch of people
kind of grimy.
in an orchard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a bit pissed, maybe.
That would sum it up perfectly. Okay, so if people want to hear more of your work, if they're not so familiar with what you do, and some of my listeners will, and some won't for sure, where can they go and listen to and obtain more of your work?
It's all about Bandcamp for
Yeah.
us, and for so many independent musicians at the moment. Streaming sites have some of our work on, although we're actually currently thinking of taking our work down from Spotify because they don't pay anyone and they seem to be supporting fascists in America. So I think we're going to
de-Spotify our
decouple
lives.
from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bandcamp, all of
Bandcamp's
our weirdest and most interesting stuff's on Bandcamp, and you can listen to it all for free on there. I think if you listen more than 3 times, Bandcamp will ask you to buy it. But yeah, you can either buy it physically, but also you can just download it, or you can just pay for it and then listen to it on Bandcamp as many times as you want. You don't have to download it if you don't want to.
And of course,
there is,
sorry, go on. Claire.
yeah, I was just
Carli.
going to say, we also make the visuals. Mostly we're entirely DIY, and we're making videos that also sometimes, bring out more of the stories. So if you were to go on the YouTube, that's a place where we tend to put all of the new things that we've made. If there's a video with the Wassail, there's actually a beautiful sign dance that's only about 30 seconds long, but I think it's a minute.
It's a minute.
But it shows you all the lyrics, but in sign language, but danced beautifully by a lady that we know up in Leeds. So that kind of feels like it's another key.
Yeah,
So
there
amazing.
are alternate versions of things on YouTube. So there's a bunch of like
Yeah.
live performances of stuff that
Yeah.
that you'll get a different sense of some of the songs from.
And a lot of your work has fantastic video to go with it as well. So it's certainly worth people seeking that out. We should point out, of course, because lots of people consider that independent performers, researchers, all of these things, pay bills with exposure. And obviously we do it for love and not for any other reason. So yes, your stuff is all free to listen to, but this is your full-time job, right? You don't go off and do other things during the day.
No, we do not. We do this all the time, which we're very lucky to be able to do. I mean, we do other things during the day, like sometimes we do some teaching. People write us into grants. We do a lot of things for commission. Other artists would like weird sounds for their stuff, and they occasionally pay us money for that. And that's really wonderful. But yes, obviously, buying stuff on Bandcamp really helps us out. And it's particularly good if you buy digital stuff, because there's loads of it, Bandcamp will make you a copy. It can be copied infinitely. But yeah, we do appreciate all of our supporters, and we're actually in the process of putting together a more of a kind of Patreon subscriber model, because that seems to work for so many artists. And we're lucky that we have a bunch of passionate people who want to support us and are really like it, just really like what we do, and that makes us feel great, because it's very difficult it's not always the easiest thing to know that you're doing something worthwhile as an artist or a musician or a researcher. And so when people tell you that they love it, that can really keep you going.
And if you want to see us live, we're coming to the UK in May, June. So this is the next UK tour. Won't be all of the UK. Probably won't be up in Scotland this time, unfortunately.
We're trying to get somewhere in Wales, but we keep not being able to find. We drive through Wales every time.
We are going to be in Wales this time.
Are we? Where?
Yeah.
Where?
Keith. Anyway, Yeah, there's a special secret thing happening on the 31st of May in Wales. But if you go onto our website, lunatraktors.space, or you can sign up to a mailing list as well. So those are ways that you can be in touch directly with what we're doing, and we'll post up our tour schedules
And
stuff.
occasionally, if you're on our mailing list, you will get
Free music.
songs that other people have not heard. They never hear.
So the summary, all of that is go to Bandcamp, enjoy the music, listen to it for free, and if you do enjoy it, then pay something afterwards, and then you will make more music for people, right? This is how it works. Fantastic. Okay, just to finally wrap up then, what's coming up for you in the immediate future? What else can people look forward to?
We are about to make an EP called Quilting Points, which is going to be a collection of our weird commissions. We do a bunch of stuff at museums and with other artists, little songs about Roman statuettes and things like that. And so we're going to collate a bunch of stuff onto a little CD and make a kind of artwork out of it. So that's the exciting thing that we're going to be doing, and we're going to hopefully have ready for our tour, our spring summer tour.
Wonderful. We shall look forward to that and all of the other things coming up this year. Carli, Claire, thank you both so much for coming on.
Our pleasure.
If you want to learn more about Lunatraktors, then you can visit their website at www.lunatraktors.space. You'll find links there to their YouTube, to their merchandise, and to that all-important Bandcamp site where you can enjoy their catalogue of music and hopefully also buy some. You'll also find a link on the episode page for this episode on my website at thefolklorepodcast.com, where I've also put links including their TED Talk, which I would highly recommend you're watching. Like Lunatraktors, all of my content through the Folklore Podcast is also freely available to listen to. But also like Lunatraktors, your support helps me to keep making the show and to keep doing more of the things that you tell me that you enjoy. You can do this on the podcast website with a donate button for a one-off thank you, or you can visit the Patreon page, and that's at patreon.com/thefolklorepodcast. You can join there as a free member, access free monthly storytelling content, maybe upgrade later on, or you can join one of the membership tiers. Now, for just £1 a month, you get access to regular audio content, and then at higher tiers, you can join the Discord server to chat with me and other members, and you can access more specialised audio and video materials from my archives or from things that I've recorded in the field. Whatever you do, your support is really appreciated. Interacting on Facebook or Blue Sky, sharing events and episodes and telling your friends about the show helps me to do more. And please leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice if you enjoy what I do. Thanks for your company. See you next time.